Hello. So often when you're doing a sewing project, the project calls for either batting or it calls for fusible fleece. Now, do you actually know the difference between both? Because a lot of times people don't. So today I am going to break it down for you. So stay tuned. First, here's what it looks like. On the left side of the screen is your cotton batting. As you can see there, it's a little softer, it's smoother, it's a combination of fibers. And then on the right side is your fusible fleece. On the fusible fleece side, you can see that it actually has a little bit of grit, and that gritted area is actually what helps it adhere to your fabric. So the quilted batting is soft. You can use it for so many different things. This is actually just a lightweight one, but you can get them in different. You can either get a lightweight one, medium weight one, or a much thicker one. Okay, first let's talk about fusible fleece. Now, fusible fleece is a one-sided fusible material that adds a layer of softness to your home decorating crafts, and it's typically used for things like purses, for bags, and anything you want to do that you need it to hold its structure. So, like you saw earlier, it actually does hold its structure. The other thing about fusible fleece is that it does stick. So when you iron it, it does require an iron to attach it to the fabric material. So when you iron it, it stays together. I typically still recommend that you sew it together, especially if you want to create a kind of like a quilted type look on there. But it stays for the most part on your fabric. It kind of, the little prickles you saw on there is what it eventually melts when you iron it and it fixes to your fabric material. So fusible fleece, it can be used for so many different projects, but primarily it's used for projects where you want it to hold on to the structure, and you also want it to be something that stays structured. So a purse, a bookcase, a Bible case, or even a placemat. That's another great way to use fusible fleece. Okay, now let's talk about some of the pros of using fusible fleece. One is it helps maintain the structure of your garment or whatever project you're working on. It is great and it will hold onto the structure. The second thing is that it's easy to work with. It adds stability. You don't need to pre-wash it. It works just fine. Now on to the cons. The biggest con I've ever seen people mention and that I have experienced myself is that sometimes it can be too stiff. So if you're working with material that's already thick or heavy and you're using fusible fleece, it can make it feel a little heavier and make your machine struggle a little bit. It's not a big deal. I typically have adjusted for that, but if you're new to sewing, that might not be the best one to start with if you to add a thick or heavy fabric with fusible fleece. Now, if you're doing something that just requires cotton fabric, you shouldn't have any problems using it. So I don't really count it as a con. It's just more caution. If you're using it, be aware of the type of fabric you're using fusible fleece for. Now let's talk about cotton batting. Now, cotton batting is typically just a sheet of fibers that provides warmth, softness, and sometimes bulk to your sewing project. What I typically use it for things like throw pillows, blankets, like anything that you feel that you need to add warmth to. If you have pure cotton batting, you can use that for a bowl cozy. Video coming up soon on how to make one of those. But it's very versatile and it's soft, which is something I really like. I tend to use a lot more cotton batting than I do fusible fleece, and the primary reason for that is it's so easy to work with. I think this is just the perfect beginner friendly item to use when you're trying to create different projects. There are pros and cons, so let's talk about the pros and the cons of using cotton batting. So the pros. One of the biggest pros is it's warm. It keeps things warm and it's very versatile. It's soft and it can be used for so many different things. So it just is something that, as a beginner sewist, you're going to find yourself reaching for time and time again. And in addition, it comes in many options. So you can get like the lightweight one, you can get a medium weight, and you can get a heavier weight one. So basically, if you're doing different projects that require maybe a little bulk, slightly more, and a lot more bulk, you can totally do that. So it's one that you can actually build on. You don't have to have a thin one like I have here. You can have ones that are much thicker, and it also has different blends. So it's not always cotton. It can have it can have a poly blend, and it has which gives it a little more options than you would when you're dealing with fusible fleece. So one of the cons I've had with cotton batting is that sometimes it shifts when you're working. So if you're a beginner sewist and you're not used to actually maneuvering your fabric as you work, this might not be the first project you want to work with, because you don't want something that continues to shift as you're working. You want something that stays sturdy. So batting is usually one of those projects I would say is more for someone who is more comfortable sewing and you're in the intermediate phase where you know how to sew and you can make a few things and you can follow simple directions. The other con I've seen with it is that some do require adhesive spray if you don't want it to shift. In other words, unlike the fusible fleece where you have the option to just iron it, or you can just iron it and it stays to your fabric, with this, like I said earlier, it does shift. So if you want to hold it onto your fabric, you have to use pins or clips, and or you have to use adhesive spray. Some people might not be comfortable with that. I do know that when I use adhesive spray, sometimes it does tend to mess up my needle, so I can only use the needle. After I used it for that project, I can't use it anymore because it just feels a little different. I don't know if it's true or maybe it's just in my head, but that's how personally I feel. And so I tend to not use spray with it. I will use pins or clips as needed. But that's really the real only con from using cotton batting: the fact that it shifts, and also the fact that it does require something to help it adhere to your fabric. It's also why you see a lot of projects that has where you use cotton batting and you actually have the quilted lines so that it comes out really great. So I hope you found this helpful. Be sure to hit that button to follow if you're not already doing so, like and share, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day. Bye.